We have our seals. We have the big bushings, the two big clips, two silicone shock gaskets in each one, as well as two small bushings and two small clips, and the outside orange seals. Let's go ahead at this point and insert the balls into our shock shaft ends. They should be tough to get in. You want to make sure that they're free and that they rotate. Being stubborn. There we go. Make sure I don't lose any pieces, parts here sticking to my hand. Okay, they're in nice and free. As long as we have the shaft, let's go ahead and put our boot over the shaft. And to make it easier, we're going to use a little bit more green slime, or again, you can use some shock shaft, or some shock shaft, yeah, some shock fluid. And we're just going to put a little bit of it on here for now. We're going to put more on later, but that just helps the rubber slip down over the metal so that we can insert our boots. Make sure they don't fold over at the bottom. Eventually, once we're done, it's going to slip over that groove and seat on there, but they'll probably come off before we're done. Go ahead and do the second one. Got that done. Now let's install the wipers onto our pistons. So grab the piston. You're going to see that there's a groove right here. And this little wiper is just a plastic little piece. Comes open, goes right around it. We'll repeat that for the second side. And that is that. We're getting close. Go ahead and take one of your shock shafts. You may want to pull the boot down and get it out of the way. I like to just fold them down. Going to put shock oil or green slime abundantly on these threads, because we're going to push those through those gaskets, and we want it to slip rather than to catch and tear those gaskets, or the seals, I should say. If they tear, you can get a leaky shock. So we're going to abundantly put this stuff on there. Going to take the shock bottom cap, and we're going to go from the bottom, and again, that's the part with the little flats on it, and we're going to insert the shaft into the bushing, and very, very lightly just kind of rock it and push. And you can also move the shaft a little bit, and we're going to poke it up through those seals and slide it down. You don't want to rip or tear the inner seals. Okay, we're all set. They should slide smoothly. Now we're going to put the pistons onto the shock. Fairly straightforward. Grab one of the little metal washers and drop it on. Grab your spacer, drop your spacer on. Put your piston on. Your last washer. And the nut. Now we're going to tighten the nut down just till it touches. Really don't need a lot of torque on this. We're just going to tighten it down till it touches. At that point, what I want you to do is make sure that your piston rotates. If it's bound up, then just loosen that nut up just the tiniest bit so that you have free play in your piston. That's how we build the shock. We'll install our second piston. I'm going to put a washer, the spacer, the piston, a washer, and the nut. Tighten the nut down just till it touches. Make sure we have plenty of free play in the piston. There it is. Wasn't so bad once we got past those clips, was it? Alrighty, now we are going to move to the next step, which is step number 108. So let's get all of our pieces and parts lined up, and we'll get going on the next step. Step 108, and we are going to build the tube assembly and the top assemblies for our shocks. Before we get started, one more time, get out your shock fluid and or your green slime. Let's lubricate up the gaskets and the seals and whatever. There's 4 of them. There's 2 large ones. And then we also have 2 smaller ones. As long as we have the smaller ones in our hand, let's grab the shock top, and that's going to go into this little groove right here. Just put that on like so. The other 2 are going to go into this groove that is inside the spring retaining nut. So we're very simply just going to slip it inside. I slip it in and hold it in the groove with one finger and then work it around till the rest falls in. And then run my finger around it to make sure it's fully seated. You can see it laying down inside there. We'll do the same for the other side. As long as we have these in our hand, let's go ahead and put them onto the tube. Going to hold the tube with the threads going up. And if you take a look at the spring nut, there's a little ledge here, and that is going to point down as we put it on. Go ahead and screw it in, and as soon as you hit that gasket, you're going to feel it, and that just keeps the spring retainers from coming off. You can measure these. They should be, when you're done, around 15 millimeters. Actually, we'll do that later on once we have the cap on. So put those on about 25% of the way. Again, you're going to want that little spring holder going down. Screw it in about 25% of the way. That's that. Let's insert the balls into our upper caps. See if I can, I'm going to use the edge of my counter here. I know you can't see what I'm doing, and press on them. If not, those are tough. There's just not a lot of place to give your hand to sit on that. So I'm going to find a pair of pliers here, and we'll use those to get the balls in. And again, they should have no drag or play on them. Okay, that dirty deed is done. Now we're going to drop the top over. We'll do that again. Pretty simple. Just hold your cap upright and drop the lid over it. Take your shock tube, go ahead and screw that on. The other way to do this, if you would like to, is to just hold your tube, and then you can see the gasket on here. You can go ahead and put that in and press it down to make sure that that gasket is fully seated all the way around, and then put your lid on. You can do it either way. Once you get the feel for it as you're putting it on, you can feel that gasket go in. Now we're going to tighten these down a little bit, and you don't have to crank on them, but we do want them just a little bit more than hand tight. So we're going to grab our multi-tool, and we're also going to grab our wheel wrench. And there is a smaller portion down in the wheel wrench that holds that cap. And then we're going to use the multi-tool on these two flats that are on the side of the tube, and we're just going to torque it down a little bit. You don't want to over tighten it. My recommendation to you is to go ahead and skip forward through the directions to your next page, and to skip the installation of the front shocks at this point, and go ahead and build your rear shocks up until the point of bleeding. The reason that we're going to do this is bleeding can be very, very messy, and we're going to want to bleed all 4 shocks at the same time. One thing I do want you to keep in mind as you're handling your shocks is that the front shocks are different than the rear shocks. The rear shocks are going to have a longer tube, and they're also going to have a longer shock shaft. So if you are going to build the rear shocks now, which I do suggest, what I would do would be to put all of the front shocks aside in one area so that you don't get any of the parts confused as you're putting them together. Not that we can't get it sorted out if you do, but for now let's just build the rear shocks separately and keep everything away from each other. So go ahead, if you choose, build your rear shocks, and we're going to have our next step of bleeding the shocks, filling and bleeding.